The hotel lobby was quieter than I expected for a Friday night, but the muted hum of conversations and soft clinking of glasses from the bar felt deafening. My heart raced as I scanned the room, my palms clammy, my breath shallow. I didn't want to be here. I shouldn't have to be here, but every instinct told me this was the moment I would finally know the truth. Then I saw her. She was seated in the far corner of the bar, her back to me, laughing at something the man across from her had said. He leaned in closer, a smug grin on his face, his hand brushing hers on the table. The way she tilted her head, her body angled toward him, was all too familiar. It was the way she used to look at me. The lighting was low, the air tinged with the scent of expensive wine and polished wood, but my focus narrowed on them. My stomach twisted as I stood frozen in place, watching her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture I'd always found endearing, while he whispered something that made her laugh. It wasn't just a meeting. It wasn't work. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms as a flood of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to spare myself the pain of what was about to unfold. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. This wasn't just a bad feeling anymore. This was undeniable. She wasn't working late. She wasn't with coworkers. She was with him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside me, and started walking toward their table. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I refused to stop. My gaze never wavered from her as she finally glanced up and locked eyes with me. Her smile faltered, her laughter cutting off mid-breath. In that instant, her face turned pale, and I knew she understood. This was it. I kept walking, my heartbreak giving way to a sharp, cold resolve. Tonight, she'd have to face the consequences. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I believed we had the kind of marriage others envied. When we first met, it felt like fate, two people perfectly in sync. We talked about everything, from our dreams for the future to the smallest details of our day. She had this infectious laugh and a warmth that could light up any room. I couldn't believe I was lucky enough to call her mine. The early days of our marriage were blissful. We'd spend hours planning vacations we couldn't afford and dreaming of the life we'd build together. Our bond was unshakable, built on love, trust, and shared ambition. She was my best friend, my confidant, and my greatest supporter. But slowly, things began to change. It started with her new job, a promotion she was thrilled about. I was proud of her. It was everything she'd worked for. At first, the late nights and increased work seemed like part of the transition, a necessary sacrifice for her career growth. She'd call to say she was stuck in meetings or working on deadlines, and I didn't think much of it. But the late nights became more frequent, and her excuses grew vaguer. Just a quick dinner with the team, she'd say, or we're prepping for a big presentation. I wanted to trust her, and for a while I did. But I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. She was distracted at home, glued to her phone or exhausted from work. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly felt forced, like I was talking to a stranger. I told myself it was just stress, that she'd come back to me once things settled down. There were moments of doubt, times when I'd catch her staring at her phone, smiling at something she wouldn't share, or when she'd rush to the other room to take a call. My gut told me something was wrong, but I silenced it. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who doubted his wife without proof. I held on to hope, convincing myself it was a phase, that the woman I married was still there. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, and it wasn't temporary. The red flags started piling up, one after another, until I couldn't ignore them anymore. Her phone, once casually left on the coffee table or the kitchen counter, was now always within arm's reach. She'd started keeping it on silent, and when it buzzed late at night, she'd glance at the screen, her expression unreadable, and say, "It's just work." At first, I believed her. I told myself she was just dedicated to her job, that this was part of her new role. But the inconsistencies began to eat at me. She'd mention a work dinner, but her timeline wouldn't add up. "We were at that new Italian place downtown," she'd say. But when I'd ask how she got home, she'd falter, saying, A coworker dropped me off. One night, as she got ready for another team dinner, I noticed she was wearing the perfume she used to reserve for date nights with me. Her outfit was a little too polished for a casual work event, and when I asked who'd be there, her response was vague. Just the usual crowd. That was the night I stopped making excuses for her. I began watching more closely, piecing together the discrepancies. Her calendar didn't always match her claims, and I'd overhear fragments of phone calls that didn't sound professional. One evening, when she left her laptop open, an email notification popped up. It was an innocent-looking subject line, meeting location confirmed, but the sender's name was unfamiliar. My heart sank as I opened it. Inside was a hotel reservation under her name, scheduled for a Friday night when she'd claimed to be working late. I didn't want to believe it. Even with the evidence staring me in the face, part of me clung to the hope that there was an innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew better. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions, scenarios, and excuses I wanted to believe. Had I done something wrong? Was I not enough? The woman I trusted with my life, the woman I thought I knew, was hiding something, and I needed to know what. I decided not to confront her yet. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of. So I waited. I watched her patterns, listened carefully to her excuses, and planned my next move. When Friday night came, and she said, "Don't wait up, it's going to be a late one," I knew exactly where I needed to be. My steps felt heavier as I walked toward the table, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise of the bar, the clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, faded into the background. All I could see was her, sitting there, laughing at something he said, leaning in just a little too close. She didn't notice me at first. She was too absorbed in him, too busy playing the role of the carefree, flirtatious woman I used to know. I stopped a few feet away, standing silently as I watched them, my emotions swirling between heartbreak, rage, and a cold, steely resolve. Finally, she glanced up and froze. Her smile faltered, her eyes widening as recognition dawned. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Hey," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" The man across from her, her lover, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He tried to avoid my gaze, but the guilt was written all over his face. He cleared his throat and muttered something about needing to use the restroom, but I stepped closer, blocking his escape. "No need to leave," I said, locking eyes with him. "You're part of this too." He sank back into his chair, clearly wishing he could disappear. I turned my attention back to her. "Working late, huh?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is the team dinner you mentioned?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands fumbled with her napkin, her composure crumbling in front of me. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice shaking. I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it looks like? So, you're going to tell me that sitting in a hotel bar with another man, laughing and touching his hand, is just some kind of misunderstanding?" Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. The other patrons were starting to take notice, their curious glances adding to her discomfort. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate. "Let's talk about this at home." "Home?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "The place where I've been waiting for you every night while you were out here doing this?" Her lover shifted again, his face now a mix of guilt and embarrassment. "Look, man, this isn't," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said, my tone sharp and final. "You don't get to explain. Neither of you do." I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling to the hotel reservation I'd found and setting it on the table in front of her. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "was all the explanation I needed." She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. For once, she had nothing to say. No excuses, no lies, just silence. I straightened up, taking one last look at the woman I thought I knew. "I hope it was worth it," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. And then, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, even as I felt the weight of her humiliation in the stares of everyone around us. For the first time in months, I felt free. The aftermath was as chaotic as I'd expected. By the time I got home that night, she'd already tried calling me a dozen times. I ignored every one of them, my phone buzzing endlessly as I sat in the quiet of our living room, staring at the wall. Her messages ranged from apologies to demands that I hear her out. But what was left to say? The next morning, she showed up at the house, her face pale and her eyes puffy from crying. "Please," she said as soon as I opened the door, "just let me explain." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, silently waiting. She started stumbling over her words, saying things like, "It was a mistake," and "it didn't mean anything." She swore it was just one night and that she still loved me. But every word she spoke felt hollow, as if she were reciting lines from a script. I let her talk, my silence amplifying her desperation. She begged for forgiveness, promising to make things right. But nothing she said could erase the image of her with him at that hotel. When she realized I wasn't responding, her pleas turned into frustration. "You're just going to throw everything away?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped back and shut the door, leaving her sobbing on the porch. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Some of our mutual friends called to check on me, their voices heavy with sympathy. A few admitted they'd seen the signs but didn't know how to tell me. Others expressed disappointment in her, saying they couldn't believe she'd do something like this. For her, the fallout was swift. The perfect image she'd cultivated crumbled as the truth came out. Friends distanced themselves, unsure of how to navigate the mess she'd created. Family members called to ask what happened, and I told them the truth without embellishment. She couldn't deny it. The evidence was too clear. Her lover didn't escape unscathed either. Word of his involvement spread among their workplace, tarnishing his reputation. From what I heard, he kept a low profile after that, avoiding the very co-workers he used to charm so effortlessly. For me, the emotions were a mix of heartbreak and liberation. Losing the woman I loved was devastating, but confronting her and walking away gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the fool she thought I was, and I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. In the quiet moments, the pain still lingered, but so did a sense of clarity. This was my chance to rebuild, to find happiness again on my own terms. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Confronting her wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't just about exposing her lies, it was about reclaiming my self-respect. For months, I'd been living in doubt, letting her actions erode my sense of self. That night at the hotel, I finally drew the line. Walking away was painful, but it also brought clarity. I realized that staying in a broken marriage would have cost me far more than leaving ever could. Betrayal doesn't just shatter trust. It makes you question your worth. But now, for the first time in years, I felt free to put myself first. I've started focusing on the things that bring me joy, rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten in the shadow of our failing relationship. I'm reconnecting with old friends, setting new goals, and allowing myself to dream again. This time without the weight of her lies holding me back. Do I still think about her? Sometimes. But those thoughts no longer carry the same pain. Instead, they remind me of the strength it took to walk away and the lessons I've learned about trust and loyalty. To anyone who's been through something similar, I'll say this: betrayal is not the end. It's a chance to start over, to build a life where you are valued and respected. Trust is a gift, not a guarantee, and self-worth should never be compromised for someone who doesn't see your value. What would you do if faced with a similar choice? Would you hold on, or would you let go and choose yourself? It's a question worth asking because sometimes walking away is the ultimate act of self-respect. And that's my story, a journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and rediscovering my self-worth. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I could have made. If you found this story relatable or thought-provoking, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between staying or walking away? I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Unheard Stories for more real-life tales of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. And remember, your worth is not determined by someone else's actions. It's defined by how you value yourself. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward.